Welcome to Everyday Economics, the podcast that helps you learn about the economic world happening around you every day. I'm your host, Chris Krug, president of the 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan Franklin News Foundation. Everyday Economics is a production of America's Talking Network. You can listen to all of our podcasts at americastalking.com. To support Everyday Economics, please make your tax-deductible charitable contribution by clicking the link in the show description. We are recording this episode on Thursday, October 19th. And joining me, as always, my friend and partner, Dr. Orphe Divounguy, PhD economist. One thing I would say not doing so great, at least in the minds of builders, is the eye on the immediate future. Builder sentiment for the National Association of Homebuilders came in for September at the lowest number. Well, I mean, it's kind of hanging out still above the line from last winter. You know, from the winter of 2022 into January of 2023. But wow, I mean, from a high point in, say like January of 2021, where the sentiment was at 84 on their index, it's down to 45, which is not the lowest number. And actually it's starting to look almost like just a slightly below average number. What's driving that?
Well, look, mortgage rates are ticked higher, right?
Is this all about mortgage rates? I guess that would be
Yeah, you got a couple of things. First, this time of the year, things slow down in housing. That's a known fact. Housing is very seasonal. The second thing is mortgages have ticked much higher. And builders, by the way, builders are not necessarily concerned about today. They're more concerned about tomorrow. And they're worried that as they continue to add inventory in this housing market, which, by the way, they're still adding inventory. You look at housing starts, you look at building permits. Building permits are down from last year, but housing starts, and you look at the number of units that are being completed in this country, highest since 2007. Okay, so builders are building. They're moving. They're moving faster. They're putting more units on the market. They're trying to sell those units. And they're getting a little worried, a little anxious about whether or not there will be enough demand to absorb all those units they're putting out there, right? And not necessarily today, but hey, 2024 turns around, will there be buyers? And so that's the concern. That's why you see builder sentiment ticking down a little bit. They understand that maybe with all those units coming on the market, they may have to lower their prices a little bit. They may have to increase the incentives, like rate buy downs, or maybe give away part of the closing costs to buyers. They understand that, and so that's why they're a little bit anxious. But let's be honest, okay? I wrote about it this week. On one hand, builders are getting anxious about the future. On the other hand, the average discount hasn't changed. It's still 6%. So they're not cutting prices, right? And what I have to tell builders is basically, look, guys, if you want to move units, price cuts lower the time it takes to sell a home. So maybe you ought to actually cut a little bit more, right? To sell those homes. So, we know builder profits are pretty good still, despite the slowdown. Mortgage rates are almost a full point higher than they were last year at this time. And yet the price cut hasn't budged. And there's actually fewer builders today giving discounts, cutting prices than they were a year ago when mortgage rates were almost a full point lower, right? And so yes, builders are anxious, but geez, demand is still so strong that you have fewer builders cutting prices, right? And that the average price cut hasn't increased, right? So this is the market that we're facing right now. We're facing a market where, yes, things have slowed down from 2021 and 2022, from 2021, but ultimately demand is still strong relative to supply. There's no supply out there, which gives builders a unique opportunity, right, to basically seize market share. And that's what they're doing. And so that's what's interesting about this story.
So you're in New Orleans right now, and later today you're gonna give a speech, and with regard to the home builder aspect of what you plan to address? What's your messaging that you're going to share?
Well, first I'm going to talk about where the housing market is right now, which is, things have slowed down, and mortgage rates are at 8%. But ultimately, we still have a massive housing unit deficit in this country. And builders are trying to fill that gap, but they're nowhere near having filled the gap. And so it's going to be hard, I think, for people who are sitting on the sidelines waiting for either mortgage rates to fall or prices to fall. And I say to those people, guess what? You ain't gonna get both. And so waiting on the sidelines, you're gonna be waiting a while. And so if you can afford to jump in today, jump in, right? So there's a lot of conversations about whether it's still advantageous to buy or rent. Look, rent, if you're just looking at the monthly cost, renting has gotten better. Is a better proposition in many, many markets across the country. But there are many reasons why so many families still want to buy a home. If you have children and you're in the housing market, chances are you want to buy, right? Mortgage rates are a constraint, or part of your budget constraint. But you want to buy a home. You want to buy a home because ultimately you want that stability. You want to keep your kids in the same school. All that stuff really matters. Zillow research shows 40% of buyers today have young children at home. 78% of buyers have at least one pet. If you have a pet, especially large pets, guess what? It's still a struggle in the rental market. And you probably want to own your home as well, right? And so those are factors that are out there that are going to play a big role into housing decisions beyond the mortgage rates. The other thing that I want to share to people is this idea that even though inflation's come down tremendously, our population is aging, and the number of workers relative to the number of older Americans is shrinking, right? We have fewer workers. That number of workers is shrinking relative to the number of older Americans. Older Americans will spend more because they're retired than they save. They spend, right? It's called the saving. They're just like, spending all of their wealth. And workers will tend to save more, right? Because they'll save because they have this, longevity. They're younger and they know that they're going to have to live longer. And so they're saving, but also, so you have fewer of them. So less savings compared to the number of spenders. And then you also have the fact that workers, if you have fewer workers, you have constraints on labor supply. And as long as labor supply is constrained, but you have a ton of spending, you're going to have upward pressure on wage growth, which is why I think the Fed has done a tremendous job. I keep saying that because wage growth has come down. Labor demand has come down, right? But ultimately, it also means that the Fed policy is going to have to remain very restrictive because the inflation risk remains. Upside inflation risk remains because you have a lot more spenders, people willing and ready to go ahead and buy stuff, and then you don't have a ton of workers to build the stuff that people want to consume and buy, right? And so as long as you have that demographic challenge, you're likely going to have upward pressure on inflation. And that upward pressure on inflation means what for housing? It means housing, which, by the way, has always been a great hedge against inflation. It means housing remains the best way to hedge, right? It means housing remains attractive, right? Yes, the monthly cost is higher, but your monthly cost is going to be fixed. It's not going to change because of the beauty, the wonder of the 30-year fixed rate mortgage, right? And so when inflation goes up again, if it does, when rents increase again, which, by the way, rents are still increasing at 3.3%, 3.5% per year, having that fixed monthly cost is going to be wonderful. And we saw that already. We saw that homeowners today with 2% mortgage rates are the happiest around. Rents increased during the pandemic, and renters were squeezed, in many places squeezed out of their homes, right? And so ultimately, this is why home buying is still the best thing, especially for families. And so when people say to me, well, buying versus renting, I say, look, there are plenty of reasons to still buy in this environment if you can afford it. And ultimately, if the U.S. economy falters, you'll probably get the opportunity to refinance. And so that's my message when people talk to me about the buy versus rent decision. When people talk to me about the housing market faltering, I say, you know why builders are still building? They're still building because there's still strong demand out there, especially for single family homes.
Well, I appreciate your thoughts as always, and we'll keep an eye on the builder sentiment. That number is lower than it had been even this calendar year, but certainly not at its lowest point. For Orphe Divounguy, this has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics and dozens of other quality podcasts at americastalking.com.